We are doing Allcraft. Today, Allcraft is with Kevin Jordan, one of the original World of Warcraft developers. Big talks. Gentlemen, let us begin. Stop saying Michael Jordan. You're going to get me to call him Michael Jordan, and then I'm going to look like an asshole. Please stop saying Michael Jordan. Like, please, I'm going to look like a jackass. All right, I got to start here.
Mindset.
Yo, what up, boys?
The retail guy.
Up? Hey, what's going on? Give me 1 second, and I'll go ahead and set everything up, guys. How you doing?
All right, real good, good.
All right.
We are chilling, dude. I sent you the frame.
Yeah. I got it. Did you see my new computer?
No, but I saw your hoodie. You look like ET, dude.
That's funny, huh? Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, dude.
That is so.
Blanket on his head.
Yeah, that's so funny. Listen, I do actually look like ET. There's actually a picture of me that looks exactly like ET. It's completely actually true. Okay, I got it.
Dude, check
Time
this
to
out.
phone home.
Yeah, there you
I
go.
got something made just for this episode, dude.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's for everybody in chat. Deals with watching your stream, and then you silence them by banning the best.
No, I want to be rich.
Check this out, dude.
What is this? Wait, what'd you get? No, you.
Rise up, chat.
Oh.
What do you want me to play sea shanty now?
Unbanned Lil W, dude. Stop.
Oh my god, dude. Okay.
All right, let's
All
get
right,
into
I think
this.
we're all in. Yeah, everything's good.
We got a bunch to talk about. Literally,
Okay.
Kevin and I were talking before the call got started, and literally the first thing that he said was like, "I'm worried we're not gonna have enough time," and I think that's a pretty solid place to start with the episode. Everybody, welcome to another episode of Allcraft. I want to give a really quick shout out right now to Party for making this episode possible. They have been supporting everything that we've been doing with Allcraft and some of the stuff that you're going to be seeing very soon with some of the announcements that we've been hinting at. They've been an incredible partner for us, and on top of that, they are trying to help you guys actually have people to play the game with. So definitely do check out Party, and we thank them for everything that they've been able to do for us. And also, if you managed to watch the after show last week, honestly, I think Burning Rob basically put it together. All of a sudden, Kevin popped into the call, and we started actually getting to talk about some of the systems that are going to be appearing in Shadowlands. We got to talk about some of the old times, and we were like, fuck it, let's do a full Allcraft episode, and here we are. Welcome to the show, Kevin Jordan, everybody.
Thank you very much. Before we get started, can we pour one out for Ursoc? Let's hear it, chat.
It's sad, man.
I didn't see it yet, dude.
Well,
pour one out.
it's ruined now. Yeah, it's ruined. I can't believe it, man. I really can't. It's kind of sad for me to even think of that. Like, Ursoc actually... There's no way he's actually dead. I can't believe it.
Well, he's going to come shooting out of that staff at some point, right? Like
He's got to... Like, there's got to, like, at the end of the
absorb him in
cinematic
there
or
and-
something. He's just, like, pops
He's going to proc out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's going to be an item you can collect, and he'll proc out, do some extra damage.
Yeah, like a
Everybody
corruption.
will be able to equip
Yeah.
an Ursoc stack.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so with that, that's probably a pretty solid place to start. I feel like one of the things that's been awesome with all the past episodes is we've gotten to talk to people who play the game in very different ways, have experienced the game in very different ways, and Kevin Jordan obviously has experienced the game in a way that none of our guests ever have before, and has a very unique take on pretty much everything, especially when we do talk about covenants, because Kevin is the first guest that we've ever had on the show that likes them. So,
Yeah.
I feel like that's a pretty solid place to start.
Gold medal here, and there's no silver or bronze to hand out. That's right.
Well, yeah. So anyway, before we get into it, can you just kind of like let everybody know pretty much like what your background is at Blizzard and what you did on WoW?
So I was hired pretty early on from tech support onto the WoW team. It was my first ever game, and I ended up being one of the 3 original designers for the game. Mm-hmm. So it was Eric Dodds and I who were full-time, and then Alan Adham is the third, and he is one of the founders of Blizzard, and at the time was also the lead designer. But he was only coming in twice a week, doing he'd come off the StarCraft crunch, right, and much deserved break. So it was largely Eric Dodds and I, with him supporting everything, obviously. But making a lot of the sort of foundational decisions on what all the elements of the game were going to be like, basically. So how it was all going to connect to each other, and where we were going with this game. So, and then as things moved on from there, each of those little systems needed additional detail work. So more designers came on, and we split into quest designers and item designers and raid designers and encounter designers and all kinds of other stuff. And my role became got more detailed into the talent system and the classes, the character classes, and all the spells and abilities. So that was largely my work in a detail sense moving forward.
So basically, you're the one that's responsible that rep paladins are like not as good as warriors. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Really well, yeah, I can't take all the credit, obviously. Mm-hmm. Tom Chilton has to take some of that credit for making the warriors overpowered. But yeah, I am responsible for the rep paladin being amazing. So you're welcome for that.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. It's very well appreciated.
So I do kind of want to, and this obviously won't be necessarily a focus of the episode, but I feel like it's something that a lot of people are probably curious about. Classic obviously came out. Yes. How did you feel about the way that it was handled, whether it's the changes that were actually implemented or just in general how they actually went about releasing Classic?
I would have to say, like, overwhelmingly, I consider it a success, right? Like, we've got in our hands a thing that we never thought we'd have. We've been on the full emotional roller coaster getting that game out, right? If you think about, the giant petition and the you think you do, but you don't, moments, like we've gone full circle with that whole thing. So at the end of the day, we're playing Classic, we're playing vanilla again in large part. Yeah, there's a some number of things that didn't work out perfectly, and they've made some bad decisions. But it's like any relationship, like 95% of it is amazing, but we tend to complain about the 5%. We tend to focus on the 5% at times.
That is very true. And
but at the end of the day, it's still largely there, and we're able to play it. And I think it's been a success.
I'm kind of curious. What do you think some of the good decisions that Blizzard made in regards to implementing Classic?
Well, the biggest one was just putting it out. I honestly don't think they've been in a position to make a lot of decisions. Like, there's no designers on the team, right, as far as I know. And so all the decisions have been sort of tech oriented. And then, as you guys know, they've hidden at times behind the no changes flag that we put up, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So there's been times where they probably should have made changes, but they've never had, like, as far as I know, an actual game designer to look at it and say, this is something we should do, this is something we shouldn't do, or how to do a specific change once they decide.
Something that was really interesting that we were talking about during the viewer call-ins last week was some of the unintended things that existed in Classic. And when you look back at them, a lot of people have very strong opinions about them, and world buffs in particular was something that you kind of talked about. And for anybody who did miss that, can you kind of talk about how world buffs took the shape that they did? Because I felt like that was one of the things where I was like, wow, I didn't really expect you guys to not be looking at them in the lens that people who play Classic view them now.
Right. So the simple truth about how they came about is it was just a bunch of content creators making things they wanted players to think were cool, right? So a way for people to remember a specific quest is, hey, let's give them a cool buff at the end of it that they can go, feel like a superhero for a little while, and but they didn't really pay attention to what the guy next to them was doing or the guy in the office, next to that was doing. And then there was also no oversight at all from a designer to say, let's look at all these things and say, well, Jesus, you've compounded all these things, and now people are going to have to get them all to do raids. So we didn't actually start looking at them to run that sort of oversight until TBC. And obviously we made a ton of changes, so you can see where we came down on the world buff thing in terms of, is this working or is this not a good idea? So
Do you think that Blizzard should have brought Classic out without letting world buffs be usable in raids?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's hard to pick out any one thing they should have done and said, yes, they should have done this, because the worry there, of course, is, well, then everyone's going to toss in their 2 cents on what else should be looked at.
Yep.
Why are Ret Paladins still sucking? Why do Moonkins have mana problems still, right? Like, and then it's just a whole different game. By the time you're done, addressing everyone's concerns, you're pretty far from the no changes concept. And are we still playing Classic anymore? Are we still playing vanilla, right? So it's dangerous.
I have a weird question that I want to tackle right now, because I love putting on my game designer hat and actually hearing some of these things from you. And when you think you do, but you don't, when put out, I feel like that is a thing that people will kind of throw on so many different ideas in World of Warcraft and retail and in Classic now.
Yep.
And do you understand where the you think you do, but you don't is coming from? Because I feel like it's something that's been so vilified over time. Like, what do you actually think about how that statement came to be?
Well, first of all, I'm pissed as hell because he stole a line that I wish I could have, had attributed to me, right? Like, I absolutely love that statement. And it's so true when it comes to design elements versus the player base, right? So you're absolutely right in that question. I could see where it was going, but in the case where he used it, it was absolutely terrible, right? Like, and so out of touch and so misinformed, right? But I use that on my stream all the time, because again, I wish I could have been the guy that the face of that meme, right? But because there are a lot of times where it's true, like, and I'll give you a simple example, right? I'll give you a simple example. So I put out the new raid boss, right? And it's hard, right? And it's there to challenge you. And a week later, the player base comes to me in the community and they say, we can't quite do it, right? It's too difficult. And I'll say, my response is basically, well, get good, learn to play, right?
I like it.
It's come back to me in a month. And if no one in the world has done it, then I'll start to look at things, right? Like, but until then, humans have a way of figuring things out, right? So the response you want is not, okay, well, here you go, Timmy, here's all the epics, nice try, here, but like, you didn't really have to actually go and do it, right? You want it to be challenging, but me saying get good just makes you angry, right? Like, that just pisses you off. So I'm the enemy when it comes to, our communication, process, right? So this is a good question for you guys, actually. So what's the appropriate strategy, right, to manage this? Because the strategies in the past, have been, it used to just be, we put a community manager between us, right? And the community manager would listen to your feedback and you'd be like, okay, I'm going to talk to the developers and I'm going to pass along your feedback. And then he'd go to me and I'd say, well, tell them to get good. They suck, right? Like, but then he would come back and he'd say, well, I've voiced your concerns and, we've talked it over and, we're going to continue to look at things. And, he crafts it in a certain way that's palatable or tries to be palatable. But now you're just upset because you want to talk to the guy, you don't want to talk to the community manager. You want to talk to the guy in charge, right? Yeah, exactly.
Well, here's the
Karen at this point. So
the weird conundrum is, right? Like, all of a sudden we're in a place where, of course, anytime a player talks, they want to beat the game, right? Like, that is the relationship. Right. That cocaine logic is going to take over, and they say, give me the loot. And if you allow the player to get that, then all they're doing is clicking the button, and they're just they're just crack rats, just hitting the button over and over and over again. But all of a sudden, instead of having a developer who can say, okay, we're not going to do that. We're not going to allow people to just run rampant with cocaine logic is something that you have to think about all of the time when you're making games, right? But you have to create a bigger and bigger gap between the crack and the player. And that's what the game is. That's the system that you create. You don't want it to just be a button that you're pushing. Right. But now we have a bunch of very loud voices who every single time something gets implemented, fuck, dude, this shit's fucking shit, bro. Dude, what the fuck is that,
assholes,
dude?
And you have a direct access to the developer behind it, right? Like, and he wants, at the end of the day, he wants to make you happy, you know, but his goal actually more coincides with you being pissed at him than making you happy, right? So, you know, it's like any parent, you know, playing a game with their kid, like everyone out is yelling, "Oh, let him win one, you know, and and the parent's like, "Hell no, I'm gonna toughen this kid up so when the real world comes along, right, he's not a giant pussy."
Prepare them out. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, so, you know, but the kid hates the adult, you know, he's just like, God damn it, I just want to win one, right? So his goal is bigger than making that kid happy every second. His goal, right, is to, you know, prepare him, to challenge him, and to make him feel like he's accomplished, and to go through the process, right, of learning what failure tastes like, learning what success tastes like, and everything in between. So, it's a tough place to be, and it's a tough place to be in the spotlight. So again, like the question that always comes up to me is, what's the right strategy, you know, for developers to interact with the community in a way that doesn't always lead to the place you know it's going to lead to, which is the community hates the developers.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a number of like really good examples of developers doing this and it working relatively well. I mean, if you look at something like Grinding Gear Games, I don't know how familiar you are with Path of Exile, but I think they have a generally positive communication and a generally positive relationship with their community. And I think that for WoW, I think that the main problem is that a lot of the things whenever Blizzard releases like kind of information about the game, it always feels like it feels like Blizzard's like the government and we're the people. And it feels like a certain amount of like push and pull where realistically you should have the same goals. You want to make the game better, and then Blizzard wants to make the game better, and you work together. And so I've tried to, at least in my stream, right? I can't speak for everybody, but I've tried to be like more productive in terms of the way that I try to interact with developers and stuff like that. And I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I remember whenever Holinka was the lead of PvP in Warlords of Draenor, oh my God. Like that guy, like he's dropped out of the public life. He came back and he has like, he's got a 6-pack now. He's working out and he is completely
he's
above
ready
that
for the
shit. Yeah, he's
thread.
tired of that. And so, it's terrible the way developers are put in the crossfire for that, because you're completely right. I mean, if you have people, like I talked about this in my second stream last night even, if you have people that are constantly coming at you and telling you that the thing that you've spent the last 8 months working on is complete trash, it's going to affect you. And it's really hard to do that and make sure that you're giving constructive feedback, and then also reconcile that with just the people that are just being emotional. And
their skill set is not, their skill set is to make systems, right? Their skill set is not to manage thousands or millions of people emotionally. And you know, like like they say it takes you to be a game designer, you know, you have to be like part psychologist and everything else. And I've had some psychology, you know, schooling, but there's still, I mean, we're human beings, right? So at the end of the day, it's like, you know, we want people to be happy. We want to bring joy to the world, right? And when we make a thing and suddenly there's a million people out there saying you're human garbage and the things you make are trash, you know, like,
doesn't feel good.
It seems like things are going wrong.
Well, it's so here is the landscape that we are in right now. You listen to the players who only want rewards for absolutely nothing, which is what they're saying. It's not what they actually want in a lot of ways, but it's what they're trying to do. And then all of a sudden you get war fronts where you actually can't lose. All you do is kind of stand in there and they throw loot at you.
Let's not mislead Kevin here. You can lose, Kevin. You have to have all 20 people coordinating, standing in one spot and doing absolutely nothing for 45 minutes. And
we found a way.
And then
we did it.
You will lose.
Humanity at its finest.
Yeah, it's actually possible.
So, like that is the type of system that, you know, people will say that they actually want, though, over time. And then on the other hand, covenants get added in. And community perception right now is this is the thing that is going to destroy Shadowlands.
Right.
where does the developer, like, if you were in their shoes right now
Right.
and you had a situation like this, what would you do?
Yeah.
Because
So this is the game we'll play, right? You guys will be the community, and I'll be the developer, right? And this is the other big thing, we talked about it last week on the show, is like the developer's job is to translate, right, what you guys are saying into what you actually want out of the game, right? So and you guys, like, there's a lot of people screaming, covenants are the ticking time bomb that's going to destroy, right?
Yes.
So we'll sort of address, like, the covenant's a big topic, it's huge. But let's address, like, the concerns the community has one at a time, and I'll come back at you with, like, what I'm hearing, what I'm translating what you're saying into what I'm hearing, and then trying to assuage your fears with the the design behind covenants, or the way I would design them anyway, which can end up being very different from the way they end up designing them. So why don't you guys give me one of the issues that people are worried about with covenants?
I think the biggest issue, number one, is that they won't be balanced properly, and there'll be one covenant that's better than the other three covenants, and that will create a situation where players don't actually have a choice because they feel like they have to pick the covenant that's numerically strongest.
Right, for their particular class,
yes,
or spec, or whatever it is, right? Okay, so that there's a power choice that overrides all the other choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that even just that one right there is extremely complex to break down. But here's a couple things I'll say. One is, let's talk about performance. Like, when it goes to, here's a piece of content and your raid has to beat it, and it's up to you to perform, and everyone has this job, right? And they're trying to perform at their best. So what defines, like, performance totals? And there's a million things that contribute to overall performance. The strategic element, which is what choices have you made before you even show up, right? Have you made good
consumables?
Yeah, consumables. Yeah. Have you gotten all your world buffs? Have you made good talent choices? Have you made good itemization choices? Do you know what buttons you're going to push and in what order to make your rotations really tight and perform really well, right? Like, so there's tons of decisions there, and in all of these things, there's good and there's bad choices, right? So good players will make high-end decisions, and bad players will make low-end decisions, and everything in between. So there's a lot of variance within that, right? In the actual performance. So that's one element, right? Then there's the tactical element of, well, once I get in there and I want to perform, but things are going weird, like they're not exactly going as planned, and so how do I respond to that? Like, we lost a tank early, or one of the healers died, or the tank's doing a bad job, which means I have to compensate, or this certain mechanic came out at a weird time, and now I have to adjust my rotations, to get back on track, right? That's all the tactical stuff, and within there's a bunch of choices, good and bad, that modify the overall performance. There's variance in there, and then there's just actual performance. Am I actually pushing the buttons that I'm supposed to be? I knew the strategy, I know the tactics, but am I actually am I a good enough gamer, right, to elevate my skill to the point where I'm performing? So there's all these elements, right? And you can make good, like, there's just so much variance across so many different elements that modify ultimately what's going to be your sort of total performance. And then there's like mood. Like, you got the one guy whose mom is yelling at him from downstairs because he hasn't, gotten his hot pockets, right? And she's been yelling at him. He's all distracted, right?
Yeah.
So he's blowing his rotations. Then there's the other guy who, like, just broke up with his girlfriend, and, like, now he's free to play WoW all day. So he's super happy, and he can just perform out of his skin, right? Like, he's
not happy.
So he's going crazy. He's good. Anyway, so you have all of these elements, right? Now you're going to put covenants into this blender, right? And covenants, let's say they're 5 or 10%, like, in total, on, like, its power level, right? And you're going to tell me that this is the only thing that matters, right, in terms of performance. This is the thing that's going to get you over this raid, right? It's going to get you past this raid. And so that's what I have a hard time believing, right? It's like the power level of a covenant is like lost within this huge pool of, gigantic variance.
Oh, yeah.
I want to move down that line for a second, because I actually think that there was a fulcrum shift during the game, and I'm curious how you feel about it, because I agree wholeheartedly that one of the things that made World of Warcraft such an interesting thing with such high replayability is the fact that you had this beautiful ballet routine that you wanted to do, but the game kept throwing wrenches at you. But at a certain point, when add-ons get added and player skill increases, the way that those fights were designed started to shift a whole bunch. And all of a sudden, a lot of the things based on your loadout became the ways that you were going to be able to get the fight down, right? Like the actual checks of the game changed a lot. And I think a lot of people see that now when they play different things like Classic, for example. Is it as mechanically challenging in the same elements that retail is? Absolutely not. It's a very different game, and that allows for different affordances. So what's your take on how the raids and end game content are actually balanced now compared to how they used to be balanced?
Yeah, so I don't know specifically because I haven't raided, right? So, and I don't know how covenants are going to be balanced either. I should also say, like, I throw out that number 10% or 5%, but in reality, I have no idea where they're going to set that balance point. But, and then, to speak to your point, Rich, like the mechanics are one of those things that you learn over time. So you can advance. You can, like, how much you know about the game and your ability to perform with those criteria increases the more you do it, right? The more reps you put in, the more you're going to understand the mechanics. You're going to get better. Whereas in covenants, it's static. You're not going to be able to change that value, right? You're not going to be able to take your covenant power level of 10% and make it 20% over time, because that's just it's a static value, right? So, and so a lot of people, that's why they eliminate that other stuff from the conversation, or try to, and say, well, covenants is just this 10%. I can't do anything about. I can't get better, at it. But again, it's like, where are they going to put the balance point? And that's what I'm not sure about. But I think what people are assuming is that they're going to F it up, right? They're going to put the balance point at a ridiculous point.
We are assuming that. Or I am.
And that's totally fair. I totally understand, because again, they've squandered a lot of that trust, right? And you guys don't have as much faith in them these days as maybe you did back when.
I wanted to ask you, like, kind of as a parallel, whenever you said that game developers are partly psychologists, and were you familiar with the way that the Titanforging system worked in Legion?
Not in Legion, but I did play retail last year 1-to-120 in BFA.
Okay.
And I did experience both forging and Titanforging.
So basically, I think that whenever you talk about the way that the covenants affect players, I think there's a large psychological element to it as well. And I think that psychological element was echoed also in Titanforging. Whenever you see somebody else get a much larger bonus to their damage and they gain some advantage in the game, that's basically through chance or through just the fact that they happen to pick the right one, and then you don't have that advantage, I think there's a negative psychological aspect that creates.
Yeah, for sure.
And whenever you look at the actual numbers, like, is the difference between like one good Titanforge and not having one going to really make you a better player? Absolutely not. But it's a psychological impact that it has, and the demotivational aspect of that is, I feel like that's kind of echoed in Covenants as well. I don't know how many people agree with me with that, but that's at least like my read on it.
Right. So yeah, you're worried that you're going to make a choice that more often than not is going to mean you're less powerful than you could potentially be, right? Because let's say like the content is evenly distributed perfectly across, like all the bosses want different covenant combinations, and you can only be one. Therefore, 25% of the time you're syncing up, and 75% of the time you're not syncing up. And so you see it as, in total, 75% of the time you're worse than you could be, right? As opposed to being, if I could change it whenever I wanted, I'd be 100% powerful at all times. But I would give up. Here's the thing you give up, is the ability to look like the thing I want to look like, right? And so, yeah, it's so funny because here's another thing that people throw at is I want to wear the pink hat, right? Let's say one of the covenants, you get a pink hat, you get a yellow shirt on another covenant, you get the Jaina mount on the third, the third covenant. Oh, for sure, it's a great one. And then the fourth one is the sweet edgelord anime haircut, right? Which of course everybody wants. And that's like the super powerful one, by the way. So
of course
you can identify the people that are, power gamers by their edgelord haircuts.
Yeah.
The real power gamers don't have hair.
Yeah, it's not right.
That's true, actually. Yeah, so people are worried that, I really want to wear the pink hat through all of my adventures and be the most powerful, right?
Yes.
But that's a very different thing than I want to be the most powerful all the time, and I don't care what hat or shirt or I have to, wear to do it. So, like, what would you say is the truth there? Like, obviously everyone wants their cake and eat it too, but do you want covenants to be a meaningful choice in either cosmetic or in power level?
I think cosmetic, most people agree that they want to have it be a cosmetic choice. I think the power level is really where a lot of the contention happens.
I think personally, my biggest game an interesting series of decisions. I think everybody will stand by that. But the second that one choice that a player makes affects every single avenue, and it's all tangled up with no real logic to why it's affecting your cosmetic, your power level, and all those things.
Right.
Like, yes, when you lock in your character, you've just made the biggest decision that you're going to make in the game. You are all of a sudden a rogue. And because you're a rogue, that opens up how you're going to play the game. That's great. If covenants are going to add a dynamic power level, I think that's great. But why is that going to affect what your daily quests are to some degree, right? Like where you're primarily spending your time, which zone you're in. Why is it going to affect your cosmetics as well? Like, do you think that having all of that tangled together is actually a good thing?
Yeah, so I do, because I'm an old school, game developer, right? Like when you think about Classic, a ton of things were tied up in identity, right? We talked about this on the after show last time, the value of identity. And one of the first big choices you make is your class, right? What class are you? Actually, kind of even before that, what faction are you? Like, look at how powerful the faction is in terms of your identity. And how meaningful that is. But it does come with a power consequence, right? There are power consequences within that choice, because it's going to determine what classes you have available. It determined what racials you had available. In the priest case, the racial class race abilities, there were all kinds of meaningful power impact on that choice, and it was one you couldn't change easily, right? Your class was another one, right? So there are things on that scale of changeable power dynamics that massively impact your sense of identity that matter to people, right? So can covenants add to that, or is it just too late for retail? Like, is retail so far down the rabbit hole of nothing can be meaningful in those ways again? Because there's a lot of people that want to merge the factions, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that a good thing for the game? Like, is that the right direction? Or do we want to strip the last bit of identity out of the game so that we don't identify with Horde and Alliance anymore? Do we want to strip class from the game?
Yeah.
Like, I can switch classes anytime I want.
Do you think at a certain point, when you've gotten to a place where I think we all know that player numbers have declined quite a bit since we were playing earlier versions of the game, do you ever get to a certain point that because the player numbers are so low that you have to make decisions that try to salvage the player bases there and enable them to play with people, or is that a death sentence for the game?
Yeah, that's probably one of the toughest questions to answer. Yeah. Great one. Because people ask me, what would I do with retail right now? It's not the first time I've been told, put me back in charge of retail, have me fix the game. But what does that even mean? What do I do with the current retail group that just wants to keep playing their game and having fun and They feel like it's their game, and everyone who's bailed on it, it's not their game anymore. So screw them. Let them play classic and shut the hell up, kind of thing. And so what would I even do, right, with retail? Should I even do anything, or should I just kind of gently euthanize it, right? Because like that's the direction it's going, right? That's the way it's always been going. So, and it's possible it might just hover at 1 million people or whatever for the rest of the time, But do we want to get some of those people back? Do we want to broaden the experience? Do we want to, again, I'll bring it back to the kid, playing the game with his dad, right? Like, do I want covenants to matter so that you have to figure out a way to beat the content despite the fact that you can't switch covenants whenever you want? You got to wear that pink hat, son. You want to wear that pink hat, you got to go in with that pink hat in every raid and figure out how to beat that content, right? Some of the raids are going to be good for you, like that's going to line up with the right power choices, and you're going to be good, and it's going to give you special bonuses, and you're going to feel like your moment to shine is here. And then the rest of the time you're going to have to manage, right? Like, what's ultimately better for the group of people playing retail right now? Or should I just kind of let it auto switch? Every time you go into a new raid, here's your new power, or better yet, there's just a button next to the covenants, and there's a little star next to the one you should be before you go into the raid. It's like, push this button, change to this one. Yeah. You should be this, we've mathematically determined, this is the right one for you. Push that button, the little star next to it. It sparkles up when you push it, makes you feel real good, trips all those endorphins. And off you go, right?
Well, what do you think about so obviously I think one of the biggest changes between like vanilla WoW and classic WoW is the amount of information that's available. And I think that I'm not really sure how familiar you are with like the high-end raiding scene in retail, but like Alliance is basically dead. Like, for example, the Hall of Fame for one of the raids that came out in this expansion was filled up by Horde relatively quickly, and Alliance never filled it up. It never got filled. And so what's actually happened with the factions in retail WoW is that people have they've actually trended so much towards Horde for PvE that recruiting on Alliance is extremely hard to do. And I think that's what's really driven a lot of the people who want to see the factions merged. And I played WoW since Warcraft 2, so like I don't really want to see that, from like a lore perspective. But it's hard not to be able to make a pragmatic argument that it's a good idea. And
that's sort of a consequence of how easy it is to switch, right? Like,
I agree.
If it were a pain in the ass to switch, people wouldn't be as willy-nilly about it, right?
Well, the same thing happened in Classic, though, I would say. If you look at the way that, a lot of these PvP servers have went, it's trended much more towards an imbalance on one side or another. There are many sides that went like, 90% Horde or 90 or 80% Alliance. And I don't know exactly, like, how do you reconcile players that nowadays are so goal-oriented with the way that they want to achieve those goals, and they're very meticulous. And you have people like, people whose jobs literally are to teach you how to play the game. How do you reconcile that with still having those meaningful choices like covenants or like factions?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to address the core problem there and basically the fake news you're trying to push on us. The reason that Horde are winning on those servers is because the Horde generally attracts strong, capable people, because the Horde is far better than the Alliance. So you can't say that it's just because they're people are goal oriented now or whatever.
We saw what all you devs did for the Horde. We already knew that you guys felt this way.
Come on. Okay, so anyway. It is tough. Like, it's a tough experiment to prove, right? Because that's the other question: is, are gamers different now than they were back then? Some fundamental way. And it's a tough experiment. The thought experiment, for me, is like, okay, we released 2 brand new MMOs, and they're both amazing in all aspects, except one is kind of retail philosophy and one is classic or vanilla philosophy, right? And which one is more successful at the end of the day, which one has just more people playing it. And it's a tough thing to say, like everyone's going to go towards retail because the gamer base has changed, and it's also, by the way, it's all new play. It has to be all new players. It can't be people that are nostalgic or anything like all of us are out of this experiment. It has to be all brand new players that have never played an MMO, to kind of see which one is more popular. So, but yeah, the way I reconcile it is we don't know until we try these things. And I mentioned this on the after show last time, is that I think covenants are this grand experiment to test the waters to see like how much do people still care about identity? How much do they care about choices that are going to change their experience and can't easily be changed? Is there any room for it left, right, in game design? I think it's of critical importance nowadays to make, to like create identity and make meaningful choices in games. And always responding to this call for, I need maximum flexibility, and I can't be paced in any way so that time becomes meaning or challenge becomes meaning or anything like that, like be thrown out. I think it's just the wrong direction, right? Like, look how popular Dark Souls was. Dark Souls came at a time when every game was just press A to win, and Dark Souls came out and blew us all away because it was like, no, you got to earn this shit, right? You got to go in there and you got to earn it. And Dark Souls isn't even that hard, right? Like,
no,
for competent gamers, right? Like, we've all beaten it. Competent gamers beat Dark Souls. And it's not like it was the hardest thing in the world, but it was just so much harder than press A to win that it just like, it blew us away, right? Like,
yeah. I don't know about that. I mean, if you use Vort's hammer, it's pretty much press A to win. It's great, let me tell you.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, the min-maxers getting hold of Dark Souls, right? Like,
oh yeah,
it's press A to win, yeah, right. But again, Dark Souls is like, it's a badge of honor, right? Like, even though it's not that hard, and min-maxers are going like, what is everyone talking about? It's still sort of a badge of honor that you can flex on your friends, like, oh, I beat Dark Souls, right? And it's like, that feels good, right? So we need more of that, right? Not less. And some of that comes from putting in meaningful choices and people dealing with the consequences, right? Sometimes you are not going to be at your most powerful, and you have to figure out a way to succeed anyway, right? And I think that does a lot of good for the game. And I don't think the direction of like, well, now this game plays like League of Legends, where I just pick my champion before the raid, and I can gear him however I want on the fly, and all the choices are made within the game, and I just run it, and then I can do something else, is the right direction. I don't think the Diablo direction is the right direction. I don't think the League of Legends direction is the right direction.
Yeah.
This is World of Warcraft, right? Keep that shit out of our game,
I think Asmon and I have had this conversation quite a few times where I kind of go back to the idea where I feel like anytime the player feels like they're getting away with something in World of Warcraft is when you have some of the biggest wins, right?
Oh,
when a dot class gets to multi-dot, for example, and like those strong moments of identity where it's like, yo, this is broken. Look at me. This is my fight. And the more homogenized you get, I don't feel like players get that identity.
And that only comes about, like, you having a moment to shine means you have to have several moments where you don't get to shine. That's the only way that happens, right?
Yeah.
And people want to eliminate both sides of that scale, and I don't know that that's the right direction. I think the right direction is, being deprived a fair bit, and then every once in a while you get to go absolutely nuts, right?
I think that we're kind of in the situation now with like what Ian said, is that, I mean, they're going to bring out covenants no matter what, right? No matter what the player base thinks, no matter what they want, they're going to bring this shit out.
Yeah. And they're going to force it down.
Yeah, they're going to force it on you. And if it's going to be like Legion legendaries, where like basically what happened is, you had like these random chance legendaries. Some people got really good ones, some people got bad ones. And if you got the bad ones, you were just like at a huge disadvantage in like, high-end rating. And one way or another, we're going to play it and we're going to see what's going to happen. And if I do want to say that I respect Blizzard's decision to go forward with this and their confidence in it. It's just that what I really kind of worry about is that if you compare a game like Dark Souls, for example, to a game like WoW, the biggest difference is the fact that WoW is it's a multiplayer game. And you have like the metas, even in classic WoW. It's harder to find groups if you're a certain class. It's harder to find groups if you're a moonkin versus a warrior. So I think people are just really worried about being moonkins in Shadowlands.
So let's address that one. That's the other one I hear a lot is I'm going to get turned down, right? I'm going to get picked last for the kickball team, right?
Yes.
Which, as nerds, we all identify with and we all hate, right? So the question I ask is like, so let's talk about the LFR. Does LFR matter in this discussion? Like, does pugging matter in this discussion?
I would say, well, pugging, I think pugging and high end rating are pretty much the two main things that you want to talk about, because LFR puts you in a group with other people, and there's like pretty substantial barriers to entry to removing people from that group. So
I thought we were talking about LFR this whole time. What is there in the game besides LFR?
It's hard to know at this point. Yeah, but that's pretty much where I'm at. Yeah. Somewhere around there.
So let's talk about pugs and let's talk about, high-end guilds. Like high-end guilds trying to knock down the raids. And you guys will have to fill me in because I don't know how the social structures work anymore. Because back in the day, back in my day, guilds were formed for social reasons a lot of times. The high-end guilds were about performance and social, performance and social. But you didn't have unlimited choice within your guild. These are your buds. These are people that you'd done a lot of stuff with. You knew they were competent for the most part, and you'd weeded out the trash. And so what you're left with is a group of people that now have to make this choice in Covenant. And some of them, let's say they're evenly distributed. It's not just the one guy who's worried about getting benched. It's 75% of your, guild that's in that same boat, right? It's not one person in the boat. It's a bunch of people in that boat. And they're all sort of not ideal for this one encounter we're talking about. And the next encounter, it might change. It might shift to be, well, more of them are, less of them are, but there's a bunch of people in that boat. So is it still a huge problem if both people or a ton of people are in the boat? Because the guildmaster still has to put a team together, right? And if he's looking at like half of his roster isn't the ideal setup, he can't bench them all because then he can't run the raid. So, but have guilds changed significantly in that respect? So
Absolutely.
So they will bounce and get new people in?
Well, people get... What really usually happens is that it's not necessarily that one person... like 75% are doing the non-optimal thing. I think that what it is from my perspective, usually whenever I see different guilds make these decisions, is that you have let's say 2 warriors or 2 mages, and one warrior is using the correct setup and the other warrior is not. Guess who makes it into the raid? And I think that's really what it ends up happening. Now, whenever it comes to each individual player, then obviously the guildmaster has to make certain decisions and not take every single optimal player. But I think that in many cases, if you go and you look at the logs and parses, and even for some of the not really as well progressed guilds, but still guilds that are trying to do something, many of them are using the exact same things. And for PvP, it's even more the case. If you look at the top PvP talents, very many of them are pretty much the same for different situations and different comps.
I think it actually there's a weird stop before you even get to that though now, because there is no scarcity of gear. So a lot of the times you don't even have people making a lot of the decisions, I feel like, in guilds for the average player. And I'm sure a lot of people in chat will maybe disagree with this, but I feel like a lot of the times the average player is just simply looking for people to play with, because people get the gear that they need off the first 3 bosses by pugging it, and then they just don't raid anymore. So
they pug and then or they luck into Titanforging, and or unluck out of Titanforging, depending
If
on how
I
your
showed you the
experience
loot table right now of the current raid, like for example, I'll use Hunters as an example. There's a bow off of Skitra, which is one of the early bosses that is just like an ideal bow. It has like a very strong corruption on it that makes Hunters feel very powerful, more playable. It's actually a great piece of loot with how it feels, but it's very early. There are 2 pieces of Azerite gear at the very end, which are your best in slot. And the ideal Azerite to go for most situations, but you can also get comparable Azerite if you spam Mythic Dungeons, for example. It's not as good, but the amount of effort that you need to put in to get those last 2 bosses down, people just screw it, man. I'll just pug the first 3 bosses that are super easy. I'll get the Skitra bow, and then I'm done.
Right. But is that at the low end, or is that at the like highest raid level tier? Are people still pugging like the highest raid tiers?
Ooh, a little bit. I mean, like you'll see people that pug the first 3 bosses in Mythic Nyalotha. I mean, this is obviously like you're talking about like a number of concentric circles of players, right? People that are max level, people that care about raiding, people that care about raiding a lot, people that care about maximizing characters. So like how many people really are doing this, it's hard to say. But I think that what happens, and this is probably something that's more relatable, is whenever you queue up for a dungeon and you want to be invited to this group and somebody gets taken over you because they're just a different class or a different spec.
Right. I think that's a very common experience, right? In current WoW.
Oh yeah.
And so we're worried about extending that, into
Covenants.
with the Covenant system, right? Yeah, so this is definitely a problem that goes away if you don't have unlimited choice, right? Like the people you have to choose from to get the job done is, a select group. And the group is selected because only the cream has risen to the top, right? Like you have to be a really good player, and perform at a very high level to be at the, on the team at the high end. And so the more the game is dumbed down, like the more just average Joes find their way into the pool of, selectables. So part of that is the problem. The other thing is, so let's play it out. Let's play out this experiment that we're worried about. So I'm in a guild, or I'm trying to pug. Well, let's talk about the guild case, because this is what I think probably people should care about the most, right? Like pugging is a mess. Like that's not a fun experience anyway. No. I hate to tell you, but so let's talk about the guild experience. You mentioned before there's 2 warriors and one warrior's getting picked because he's the right covenant and the other guy isn't.
Yeah.
So the one guy gets benched. He's out. They go and they do the raid. They get gear. Now he's on farm status for a little bit. Like, again, these are all old terms too, because I feel like in the modern game, you don't just kill one boss and then farm him for a while until you're ready for the next boss. You clear the whole wing or whatever, like all in one night.
You go as far as you can.
But the next fight is going to have different demands. The next fight is going to have that the warrior got benched in the first fight. Now he's the right covenant combination, right? And the guy who got pulled in isn't. So now what happens as we play this out, right? Like is the first guy still getting picked because his gear is better because he was able to farm the first guy? Or is like the only thing that matters the covenant choice? And again, we can't know because we don't know how they're going to balance things.
Well, the way that it usually goes for me, right, is that you pick the option that's best most often. So for example, like you have 9 bosses, and if one covenant is better on 6 of those bosses, that's the covenant that you go with. So usually
you try to knock all 6 down, or all 9 down in one night.
Well, it's more that like if you,
or do you swap out on a fight to fight basis?
Yeah, like generally the way that I think people will make decisions for these covenants that are raiders are you're going to look at the bosses that are going to be the biggest roadblocks. So like probably your first DPS check boss, your last 2 bosses, last boss, and people are going to choose their covenants based off of that. So you're not
Right.
really looking at optimizing covenants for the individual fights that are before that. It's more so optimizing covenants whenever you run into those roadblocks that are actually challenging. Because what you're
Right.
saying,
The
you're
roadblocks
right.
that are challenging.
Is
Yeah,
it like
that's what
90%?
matters.
Yeah, 90% of the time, like your damage doesn't really matter that much in the fights.
Right.
And in retail WoW, just do the mechanics and most bosses will die unless you're in like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
top 50 guild.
And so, but the perception is right that the covenant will matter way more than a lot of this other stuff. Again, like on that performance, blob I was talking about before. Covenants are going to be the most important element of that. It's not the guy who's a known consistent performer that is always topping the charts, but he happens to be the wrong covenant for this roadblock fight. Like he's going to get benched because we need a guy with the right covenant. Is that the worry? Like,
I think that there will be cases for that. So like, for example, there was one boss in Uldir where combat rogues were just like really, or outlaw rogues, I guess, were just like really, really overpowered for this boss.
okay.
So it didn't really matter how good you were at playing at your other class if you just had a combat rogue that could just come in and dumpster everybody else on damage. It like didn't even really make a difference at all. Oh, it was subtlety. Okay, well, regardless, it was one rogue spec that was just ridiculously broken, and I think that's kind of what people are concerned about is because you're not just looking. The covenants have like there's like a force multiplier with covenants that it's not just this ability, it's also the soul binds that modify your spells and give your spells like additional effects. So it's like you're going to have one, the odds are, right? And this is like things that Blizzard have done in the past, right? With like Legion of Legendaries, generally players will find out that there is one that's better than the other ones in a situation that's the highest ratio, and they will just go with that one. So it will just be kind of expected that people go with the one that works 70% of the time than the one that works 40% of the time.
I feel like Zach just started to touch on the thing that I'm most focused on with what he said right now, because look at how a lot of people play the game now. And obviously we don't have access to the data to say how many people it necessarily is, but the top end and the like heroic rating, for example, is just a very different dynamic. The top end raiders that have a huge amount of attention on them with different things like the World First Race and Twitch in general are going to be doing the most degenerate things that they can to give themselves any advantage. They're going to have 4 of each class with every single covenant, so they can come in the case that there is the subtlety rogue situation where you can just spam out your Phantom Knives and be able to funnel all that combo point finisher damage into the target that you're trying to get down, right? Obviously, that was a broken thing. They had a bunch of rogues ready to go for that. Now, when that gets watched by the average player, that what you go, oh, okay, it's the same as if you're playing Fortnite and you're watching Ninja crank 90s with the boys. Poggers, dude, this is how we do it. Now everybody thinks that you need to go that degenerate play style to be able to
every night for me.
Just watching, just cranking 90s with the boys.
No, just watching Ninja. Yeah, watching Ninja every night. Play Fortnite.
Oh man.
Dude, yeah, 2020.
Can we wrap this up? What's up?
Yeah, what's back? Dude, he's back. But yeah, I think like the main thing is though now is all of a sudden the way that people actually look at the game is different, and the way that people play the game is very different. That element of progress that you can have on your own pace with the people that you play in an expansion, that's a thing of the past. In Burning Crusade, a lot of people, they were inside of Karazhan when a bunch of other raids were out, right? Because they hadn't downed that boss yet. Eventually they got all the gear. Eventually they were able to progress, and you progressed with your guild rather than just the patch. You played the expansion with your guild and you beat it. Now, the second that a raid's done, you get loot thrown at you to the point that you're choking on way too much loot. You don't have any identity with that loot as a character, so you're not working towards that identity on your character sheet. And you're just looking at people that are playing the game in a way that you most likely won't even play it, racing to get things done and then boost people in the game.
Yeah. You touched on a lot of different things there. Where to go with this discussion?
I got mad. Sorry.
That's all good. But yeah, definitely like, so here's like the PSA part of this whole thing is, I'm going to do you all a favor and tell you, if you get benched because you're not the right covenant, we've done you a favor, right? Because you're going to find a group or a guild that actually doesn't care that much about that, and you're still going to knock all the bosses down, but you're going to have a way better time because you're with a bunch of people that are more fun to hang out with, or are more in tune with what you're trying to do, right? Because what you talked about right there, Rich, was getting through the content as a guild, right? Getting through it, and those are the things we remember. We don't remember the items. We don't remember we remember some of the items, but only because they're a reflection of the experiences that we had, with that group of players. And that's what's more important, right? Like in terms of total experience, right? Because are we still if I were to ask you what's more important, how fast we finished the raid or that we finished the raid, which one of those is more important?
How fast?
Really? Okay. Yeah. So even for people that aren't doing world first or within the top 10 results, or
see that wasn't how it used to be though for me.
What matters more is still how fast, because I guess the pressure is if you don't get it done fast enough, then the new content comes out and it invalidates the whole point of knocking the boss down. So you're always on this clock.
I feel like people used to play the game because they enjoyed playing with other people. That was why I played the game. I had a lot of fun and I liked to loot a lot, and I played a bunch of different characters to try to get loot on those characters. And I just enjoyed playing with people. And I played on, I had server identity. I played on Nathrazim, and I was in 3 or 4 different guilds just hanging out with people. And that was what I loved to do. It wasn't about speed. Half the time we would play. Yeah.
And that's the type of thing that I certainly designed the game for, was that sort of experience. I also designed it for people that just want to bury their head in the latest degenerate strats and knock that boss down as quick as possible. But I didn't make the game only for that person, right? I also made the game back in the day for what you're talking about, Rich, which is chilling with the homies and knocking bosses down at a more relaxed rate,
It was I had the one guild that I went super hard with, but I don't even remember those memories as much as I remember being in the scuffed group. I have a memory, this is even in Wrath of the Lich King, we were doing Galuth, and I need to respec 7 times because we just had a terrible group composition. I remember that night of just trying all these stupid things, and then all of a sudden we finally managed to get it down, and we laughed about it, right? And I remember the first time that you went in and you had people dying to Frogger and stupid shit like that. That was what the game was about. And now everybody's just you have a few angry neckbeards left who kind of want to wrap their entire identity up in the game still and want to think that they're world first completionists. And then you have a bunch of people that their casual interest just isn't there nearly as much because the zeitgeist of gaming maybe changed, and they just want to instantly drop in, get instant gratification in different things like battle royales and things like that. And I think the game has done a weird thing of trying to bridge those gaps. Sometimes it feels like the game's trying to attract every player that doesn't want to play it and forgetting its core audience. And then sometimes it feels like it goes way too far for hardcore.
Because in the fast argument, you were saying, Asmongold, how fast is what matters.
Oh, I have fun doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly fun. I worry that this would just be the cynic in me, but I worry that some people are trying to finish it because they're not particularly enjoying it. Does that make sense?
I do. Yeah. Get out of it as quick as possible.
Yeah, get it done so I can have fun, or I can do crazy things, or we talked about a little bit of this last time, and the freedom of being done with the expansion, right? I'm addicted to heroin. I got to get through this heroin.
That's gonna be a bad clip, bro.
Yeah. so I can go to the store and get some vegetables, right?
Yeah.
I just want this heroin trip to end so I can be functionally, useful again.
I think that it's similar to that. Yeah. I mean, to a degree.
That in there, right? So obviously not everyone. Some people just generally competition is obviously a huge thing, right? People love to compete and they love to be able to flex on everyone around them when they compete, right? So I totally get that, but yeah, I worry there's a lot of people that are kind of generally exhausted with the treadmill, but they keep running, you know.
Well, I think that the thing for me is I agree with you with guilds, right? Is like finding a guild that's okay with you not being perfect all the time is okay. I generally agree. And I think that it kind of dovetails into a bigger issue where more of the player base now pugs than they used to. And there's less general guild play. And you don't really have like that trust that you build up with the guy that you've raided with and talked to for like 4 years. And so you know he's going to do his best in a raid, even if he doesn't have the right covenant. And I think that's really where a lot of the problems arise. And I think that's kind of one of the issues overall with the game is that people just look at your number. Like, are you familiar with the Raider.io score?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so they look at that number, they look at another number that they're able to quantitatively evaluate somebody with, and that's all. Yeah, that's all you're worth. And I think fundamentally that's a problem with the social structure in the game because you don't have reasons to make friends, and you can just replace people in seconds.
Yes.
Like whenever I did classic WoW, like if you were in Scarlet Monastery and your tank didn't know how to taunt, you're going to teach that tank how to taunt.
Yeah.
Because your alliance...
Because it's going to take an hour to get a new one.
It's going to take an hour to get a new tank. It's going to be faster to teach
minutes to tell them how to push a button.
Exactly. And so I think that's something that's been lost over the years, especially with like the group finder and just generally kind of throwaway social interactions. And I'm not sure really... Where do you think that really started to happen with WoW?
Definitely started with Dungeon Finder.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to also go back to the subtlety rogue thing you mentioned before, where the subtlety rogue was just super overpowered for a while. How long did it take Blizzard to fix that, if they ever did?
Pretty quick. I think they fixed it after that tier was over. I don't remember exactly.
I think it was after Old Deer. Yeah. I mean, it was it did not only impact that boss. Basically, it was how subtlety functioned. Subtlety you get pretty much put in the dirt. You could do big pulls with subtlety even in dungeons, and they're fan of knives. They would just basically get a shitload of combo points and be able to funnel all their finishing point damage into their prio target, and it was just like you had ads on that encounter. So
so that's the case, because that's bad design, right? Like I don't think they intended for that to happen. I think that just accidentally happened.
Yeah,
and it was something they needed to fix. But people are worried that that's going to happen again with the Covenant thing, right? Like we're going to have certain bosses where this just happens. So there's a lack of trust there going in that the subtlety rogue experience isn't going to happen.
But at the same time,
that level and frequently with the Covenant.
So you say that the subtlety rogue thing is bad design, which I think is a reasonable take on something like that. But I feel like there's been a fear for a really long time to put anything in the game in case that happens. Like even with reflect, right? Like that's a mechanic you really don't see in the game very often anymore. Do you think that it gets to a certain point where, as a developer, we potentially see them be too scared, and that's why the homogenization happens?
Yeah. That's why they're in the corner. You know, I talk about the corner they've designed themselves into, and so that's within that context, right? That's why people are so angry about covenants, because covenants are an attempt to push their way out of that corner. But everyone's just worried about like the realities of, well, you're going to create another subtlety rogue situation, and then the covenant, what covenant I am, matters more than anything because of this broken combination of variables.
I think there's a lot of that. People are just concerned based off of what's happened in the past with like Legion Legionaries being very overpowered, certain Azerite traits being very overpowered, and just completely eclipsing other things.
Yeah. And so I guess the question is, do you want to get out of this corner, or do you like this corner? Is the corner comfortable? Do you want to just keep working the corner with safe bets and no meaningful choices? And right. And there's obviously different answers to that, but different people want different things. But they're trying. That's what covenants are, an attempt to get out of the corner, right?
So this is a very nuanced question that we started to talk about on the viewer call-ins, and it has to overall do, or like kind of all-encompassing, have players changed. And one of the things that I want to ask is with a system like this, the community already has a very negative view about it.
Yeah.
It could be implemented incredibly well, but the community right now, if I go, hey, put a 7 in chat if you think covenants stink, like you're gonna just see a wall of 7s, and then and then Asmon's gonna be like, come on, dude, and they're gonna keep going, they're gonna keep spamming stuff. Yeah. And I kind of want to ask, like, I feel like that is very different than when you were still working on the game. Do you think that the mechanic itself or the system itself will ever be able to break through that noise and actually be like, hey, look, this is a good system, give it a chance? Right. Or do you think that negative perception is just this toxic thing that will corrode away at any system?
Yeah, so it comes back to what we first started talking about the show. But do me a favor, guys, put a cock in chat if you've had your mind changed by me so far tonight.
Oh shit, that's a lot of cocks. Yep.
That's a lot of cock, man.
Okay.
All right. So I'm willing to bet a lot of you didn't actually get your mind changed, but you just can't help yourself. So I guess I win on that.
Yeah.
7s are kind of lame, to be honest.
I agree.
It's a funny number, man. It's a funny number.
So yeah, it goes back to like designing what's best for the game, what's best for you, despite what you think is best for you, right? Like, you think you do, but you don't. That's where this territory comes in.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's true, right? Sometimes that saying from a competent designer is very true. And the question is, and there's a wide range of players as well. Some people are going to understand the value of sometimes doing painful things for the game to make it a better experience. And sometimes you're going to have a player that never understands that and only just wants the loot, right? They just want the stuff, right? And they don't care about the integrity of the game. They don't care about the integrity of anything in the world or anybody's experience outside their own. They just want the stuff and to be held, to be damned with whatever. Yeah. If the game blows up tomorrow, they'll go play something else, whatever, so yeah, and this is where you guys come in, in such an important way, because hopefully, ideally, you guys care about the world enough, you care about the game enough that you want it to be its best possible self for the next 10, 15 years, rather than, that other guy I was talking about who just doesn't care. We'll just play Fall Guys tomorrow. It's fine, Yeah. Who cares about WoW, right? Obviously, you guys care a tremendous amount about WoW. So, and yeah, it matters that you guys have sort of a deeper understanding of, is this going to be good for the game or not? And I'm not saying that you don't. Obviously, this Covenant thing is very complicated. And I'm one of the few that comes down on I want to see this wild experiment. I want to see if this can push the game out of that corner it's in. And try to aspire towards some of those classic ideologies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that want to see some of that stuff come back, and it's just really whenever you talk about people wanting to play like PvP and then they want to raid at the same time and they can't really be optimal in both, and it just kind of it sucks. And like with Classic WoW, you kind of have the same thing with respecking, but with respecking you can just pay more gold and there's not really a like hard time gate on it. And I think that's really where a lot of the frustration comes in, is time gating in general. And I'm actually kind of curious. So how do you feel about the way that Blizzard time gates things now? Do you think that there's too much of it? Or because Classic WoW doesn't really have that much time gating outside of raid lockouts.
Yeah, so there's places to use time gating and there's places you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Raid lockouts, I think, I don't know if it's just that it's an acceptable standard because it's always been done. And we don't know what the experience is like of just being able to raid everything as much as we want.
Mythic Plus.
But that's not a raid, right? No. That's just. But yeah, so yeah, it's interesting because is that what we want? Do we want the experience to just be over as fast as possible. I came in, I did the thing, and now it's over, and I can go do something else.
I think a lot of that mentality comes from so many of the loops for player power progression come in the form of chores.
Yeah.
Like so much of like you look at the current loop in the game, and I was talking to you about this last time. You progress your character in a lot of ways with corruptions, and a lot of ways with being able to grab sockets, right? Like those are two ways that you can progress your gear. And those loops, a lot of the ways that you actually can go about getting it for sockets, for example, is you go ahead and you do your dailies, you get a currency, you turn that currency into something, you get that vessel, you jump into your vision, which you are going to be doing solo, and at this point is relatively mindless, easy content, unless you're me. And then all of a sudden, after you do enough of them, you get your socket and you put it on your gear, and you just never interacted with another player the entire time.
Yeah. And that comes down to like someone taking charge of the experience itself, right? Rather than the destination.
Yeah.
A lot of design nowadays is just about the destination. And then once I drop all the raids, flex, like that's what matters. And it's like, well, yeah, but what's the process? And from what I understand, like individual boss fights are still pretty solid, like they're very competitive in terms of what's out there in the gaming space. People have a lot of fun with them, but yeah, the process of leveling your character is pretty bad now. The process of advancing your character in a lot of cases, like Rich was just saying, feels pretty bad. There's very little social experience that's worth a while. So yeah, it's like someone needs to take charge of those things, those elements, and start redirecting people to the better experiences, right? That's what's wrong with dailies. I talk about this a lot on my channel. Dailies are sort of the worst form of content because they're repetitious, right? Like once you've done them, then you have to do them the next day and the next day and the next day, right? Like imagine having to do any quest in the game over and over and over. It's the fact that you had to, have a bunch of quests that you've never done before. That's the only thing that makes them interesting in a lot of cases. There's a little bit of story. There's a different route you have to go. Like every time it's theoretically new, but dailies are like, here's the best reward, and it's the worst form of content. And that combination is really, really bad. So,
well, it's compounded too, right? When you have a world that is sharded, so there really isn't anything dynamic happening with any of those quests. You're not really making a story with players, which are the most interesting thing in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So, they need to get away from that. They need to get away from those like mobile systems that reward logging in or doing a specific thing because it's the best rate, and start redirecting players towards the stuff that they've lovingly crafted, which are the individual quests and other forms of gameplay that are meaningful, right? So, and that could be done, but it's like I don't know why they're stuck on the tried and true methods of I guess it's super simple and people know exactly what they have to do when they get in, like where to take the trash out, right? There's not going to be any surprises. I'm not going to have to look up on a wiki to figure out where
to take the trash out, Asmin.
yeah, of course.
You know where to take it out, dude.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, most of us know, but somebody send Asmongold a wiki of where his trash cans are.
He needs a guide, man.
I'll have you know that I have a trash can, and I've used it twice in the past month. Okay?
Nice.
The trash can's the cleanest thing in your room.
Unfortunately, you used it as a toilet.
Look, gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, you gotta raid, man. I can't go AFK.
Gotta get that Azraid power.
Yeah.
Oh man. So this is going to be somewhat speculative because obviously you haven't been on the team in a little while. When you actually look at, a new system pops up. Let's say it's Warfronts. Let's say that's Islands. Some of these new systems that we saw in the game.
Don't make me look.
Yeah, don't look at him. You'll cry. When you actually, if a developer is creating a system like that, it's not rocket science that they want the system to do well. And I feel like it's to a lot of people who watch this show. A lot of people watch Asmon stream. A lot of people watch my streams, and Asmon, myself included. Sometimes we put on a little piece of tinfoil on top of our malding heads, and we like to theorize about why certain things exist in the game the way that they do. Whether it's the month-long period or longer than a month to actually have this corruption vendor rotate to the things that you're going to need. Whether it's the fact that islands all of a sudden have like all this juicy Azerite power, right? You start to get into this position where you just say, okay, are the developers trying to increase player engagement numbers around their system so they don't lose their job? Do you think that is something that we are completely nuts for bringing up, that certain rewards are in the game sheerly to increase player engagement hours so people feel like they're going to be able to save their jobs, or investors are going to continue to dump money into the game?
Yeah, they're definitely worried about those things. And, we talked about the conspiracy theory of MAUs, right? Monthly active users, and
I hear that
getting
a lot.
those numbers out, right? And I guess I understand the temptation of designers to use cheap design mechanics to get people logging in and punching those, clicking those buttons. But I think kind of industry wide, where we have a problem with hiring game designers to do the game design job. I think we're hiring a lot of people that aren't great game designers to try and do a game design job that they're not equipped to do. I think there's a lot of games that are mostly assets. They're asset rich, and people aren't really looking at the moment to moment experience. They're not looking at not only the character's progression, but the player's experience, right? I remember interviewing for a job after I had left Obsidian, and the CEO, I described an experience I was having in a game, and the CEO actually said to me, wow, that's the first person I've interviewed, first game designer I've interviewed who's talked about the player experience as opposed to the character experience. And that just stuck with me. It's still stuck with me today. Like, it just blew me away, like, why aren't designers talking about the player experience?
How do you think they get hired then?
Because they talk about like the systems, right? Like, oh, it's a system where your character goes up levels and he gets some new talents, and then he has to make this cool choice where he's going to swing a blaster or a knife, or in some cases he can do the blaster and knife combo. Oh my god, right? Like
Spreadsheet. It's literally
or like spreadsheet design. Like, oh, and my system scales perfectly, so we can reuse content in this way, and like, it's just like, oh.
I hate to be negative about the industry right now, but I feel like you can answer this in a way that not many people can. When I went to school for game design, one of the main things that they would always tell you was, learn how to mod. Actually be able to put these things in front of people, right. Create experiences for yourself. Like, these are the ways that you're actually going to learn how to do things. But then you realize when you get into the real world that might have been how it used to work, and that's probably how a lot of the best game designers actually started out, right, by making games. But now you realize you just get a QA job, and you cozy up to somebody and you get promoted over time. And I feel like that's like how the entire industry works right now. You could be a janitor. See, that's what I'm curious about, right? Because I feel like now you work your way up and you just try to get promoted over time. And I feel like a lot less people there's less of a modding culture and things like that. And I feel like you actually have a pulse on that, because I left that world behind because I realized I can literally make penis jokes and actually be able to pay for food. And it's a lot easier.
Right. Yeah, it actually used to be like, if I remember the WoW team back in the day, a very high percentage of the team was made up of QA and tech support, because that's the way that company worked. But there was a lot of talent in that pool. And then that kind of established that was the way to get hired. It was, I'm going to get a QA job, I'm going to get a GM job, and then somehow I'll get pushed up, right? But that stopped being the way because there were just too many people trying to get in that way, and so barriers were created between those jobs and the development team because they were constantly trying to interact, and it was like the producers felt that it was taking away a lot of our time because we were like busy reading proposals from a million different GMs, and right, so that stopped being the way to get in. And nowadays I do feel like it's back to, if you're a creator, if you're a mod, that is the better way, like, because then you have this portfolio you can develop, and you can show it to somebody that says, hey, I'm serious about getting in the industry, I'm serious about working for free, basically, because I love this stuff, and the game industry loves to exploit passion. So they see that and they're like, oh, sick, I can pay this guy peanuts and he'll do it for free.
Do you think that distribution is starting to swing? Like, distribution changes everything. Every single medium that's ever existed. All of a sudden now you can throw a webcam in front of some balding neckbeard, and he's going to be able to get in the house of 50,000 people and be able to try to entertain them. And then it's an audience that is much more tailored than if you have the Super Bowl getting into a billion homes or whatever.
Right.
With gaming now, distribution has changed as well.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you can have these indie companies actually make a really compelling product that speaks directly to its smaller player base. Do you think that AAA will potentially die because of that?
Oh gosh. Yeah, the Kickstarter was a big part of that as well. Will they eventually die? You'd love to think that their strategies will no longer work in the future, but I don't have a lot of confidence in that.
Okay.
Our brains are programmable, right? That's what we've discovered. Like our brains can be fooled into doing things we don't really.
Can I test that really quick?
Yeah.
I want to test that. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a quick second here to remind you that if you link your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account, you actually get a free sub every single month. And if you click on that sub button right now, you might actually have a free sub. Twitch Prime, Twitch Prime, Twitch Prime, Twitch Prime, Twitch Prime. Let's see, dude. Let's see how programmable they really are.
Let's see it.
we're gonna find out right now.
Can I make bold claims at what they'll get? Free staffs of Jordan.
So 4.
All right.
Okay. 5.
Train, baby.
Right. Okay.
We're doing it.
Okay.
Get programmed. All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, it seems like you guys are right. That's just
you sheep. You fucking sheep.
Wait. You can't say that to them, man. Don't tell them that. Tell them how good they're doing. If you just Twitch
Prime, you are the biggest cock.
No.
Literally, your mind just got fucking programmed, sheeple. Wake the fuck up.
He's
lying. That's not true. You're a good person.
Like, no, you're good people. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so there's your AAA dying, right? Like,
yeah.
And he didn't even offer him any endorphins, really.
No, I didn't read their names.
Yeah.
Asmon better take me out to dinner, man.
Oh, jeez. Okay, dude. Yeah.
So yeah, I want to think we're gonna get exhausted by this, microtransaction loot box shenanigans, right? But yeah, there's a lot of brains out there to exploit. More brains coming up through the pipeline every day. So will it happen in our lifetime? I'm not sure. But I am super happy about distribution allowing for a second option, right?
Yeah.
Which is what we get now with the Kickstarters. We get it with the indie guys, Steam Workshop, like there's all kinds of things where it's just people making games. And a lot of them are really, really well designed and a great time to play, but they're not asset rich. And so they may not look the best.
I think that's one of the things, especially I think with Path of Exile, right? Path of Exile originally didn't have like the same type of artwork that Diablo did, but it had like the systems and design instead. And it kind of came into itself in that way. I think that there are a lot of examples of like what you're saying is that these development studios that are very big are like they're so big it's so hard for them to make decisions and do things in an agile way to make their player base happy. And I think with Blizzard this happens a lot, is that there's a lot of red tape and people that are being involved and, people that need to be talked to, approval that needs to be met. And so by the time a decision actually happens, it's annoyed the player base now for like 3 months.
Right.
And I think that's a big issue.
Do you think Covenants is a part of that?
Well, I mean, this has been going on since a long time before Covenants. But,
sure.
Yeah, I think Covenants does.
Do you think Covenants is like because I see covenants as like they're trying to start a revolution almost, right? Like,
Yeah.
Like if I were the suit, right, and I'd be like, well, Ian, I've been reading Reddit, and there's some, talk about people don't like covenants. What's going on here, bud?
Yeah.
I think you should pull that right out of the game. They don't like it, right?
Yeah.
And Ian's like, no, I'm going to do it, man. I'm going to do it anyway. That's my role, is to piss everyone off. I'm going to do it. Screw you.
Seems that way sometimes.
When you look at like PoE though, for example, since we already used that as a game that we can kind of frame things in, I feel like they have a little bit more street cred with their average player, and sometimes they add something and they're like, yo, this might look bad, play it for a little bit, and if it's dog shit, we'll change it. And in the past, I feel like every single league, they've always changed it when it doesn't work the way that it should. And you know what? A bunch of people complain on the Reddit. They say, I'm never going to play this league again, but they're always back. And at the end of the day, I think even the loudest crybabies on Reddit, and it's always the Pepegas that are the loudest, but I think that you can even see in their comments a lot of the time that they do acknowledge that they are serviced well by GGG. When you do look at WoW right now, I think one of the most recent things you can look at is Azerite and like Azerite gear in general. And it was obvious to so many people that you were like, oh, man, this system's not going to work. This system is bad for these reasons. And there's even historical instances in the game just visually. If you go all the way back to TOC, where it's like, okay, a system like this was implemented and didn't work. And now visually we're getting the same thing again with a bunch of promises that you can almost refute right on the spot. And then the developers have even come clean and basically said, yeah, we thought once you actually saw more of the system, like it would have worked out. And you get those flashbacks the second that you see the Covenant system, right?
So here's the big difference between Azerite and Covenants. Azerite is dog shit, and Covenants has my endorsement.
There we go.
Right, there it is. It's that simple. Hey,
Covenants 2020. Get behind it.
Well, it's happening one way or another, whether I like it or not, and despite my best efforts. So I just honestly, I hope you're right, man. I do.
Like you said, 9.3. 9.3 will be in a post-Covenant world. It'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think that it was bad that they put in the pull the ripcord, or the idea of the ripcord when they were? It made it seem like we were communicating with the devs in a way that's better than ever before. Right. But now you have everybody with the hashtag pull the ripcord, and I feel like the community, it's actually.
Is that what that means?
They have a strong base though, right? Like they have a strong base to be able to say that, because the devs opened up communication in that way. And I don't want to make it so the devs don't want to communicate more. I actually think they've done a fantastic job leading up to this expansion. But do you think that was maybe a mistake to actually have this ripcord be an entity that existed in the conversation?
Yeah, I do. I think, because again, it's like you got to stand by your design. You have to believe in it. You have to have enough ego to fight off, all the complainers if you believe in the system. The question is, and this is a tough one for you guys to answer because you just want Covenants to die in a fire, but try to put, the other side of your brain to work and say, what good is going to come about from Covenants? Is there anything good? Can you imagine a long-term thing that Covenants might do for the game, right? Or is it just the latest Azerite and it should just be destroyed?
I think I don't want Covenants to completely die.
Yeah, I said last week that I'm willing to bet that Covenants aren't even an issue within the first month of Shadowlands. I'm willing to bet that it's largely going to go unnoticed, and there's going to be some other big thing that's pissing everybody off.
I actually want to see, and I'm curious where Asmon stands on this now, because I feel like we haven't talked about it in a little while. My opinion of Covenants from the very start was, lore-wise, it's actually really interesting, and it creates replayability for players to go through the story through a different lens. And as there are probably going to be a lot of people in the chat with the L Omegalol RE right now, sure, but if you actually do look at it, it does have a big impact on how a lot of people do play the game, even if it's not the way that you in chat actually do play the game. But I think that that's great. I also think that the big impact that it can have isn't necessarily with the power gain. I actually couldn't care less about having power gain behind it. I can see the upside, I can see the downside, but if you remove that and you make this a thing that actually allows you to have a visual identity with your character again, I think that that is a huge win. I don't think power is the only way that people have made identities with their characters in the past. I think that things with transmog have made it a lot harder to have a true identity. And if you have really sick stuff tied visually to these covenants, particle effects, spell effects, all of a sudden the game can be changed forever with rewards that aren't saturated with 15 years of being handed out like fucking candy.
Right. Or something they have to take away at the end of this expansion.
I think the real challenge with like being able to evaluate the positive and negatives with covenants is that the negatives are so quantitative versus the positives are much more intangible. And I think that's really what the challenge is, because I agree that, you know, there is some value in having, you know, more class identity and character identity and having control over that. I think that, you know, it's partially like an argument that's against transmog, is that whenever you can just transmog your character to look whatever you want, your armor that you're wearing means less. So I understand that argument, and I think that we're just going to have to see what happens at this point. Like, that's pretty much where I'm at.
But I'll throw out another, you know, thought experiment for you guys. Okay. Players are already making a cosmetic choice that affects their power in a bad way in the game. And so this is how the thought experiment works. If I put a gun to your head and I say, in 6 months, I'm going to need you to have a high performance level in, you know, World of Warcraft, with a specific with any class you want, and if you don't perform at a certain level, I'm going to force you to play Final Fantasy 14 for a year straight, right? But you can play any class you want. I'll give you 6 so I'll give you 6 months to train, and you can practice with all the classes, right? And you'll find out which class you actually perform at the highest level with, right?
Okay.
It'll just turn out, you know, there's a good chance it'll be the class that you don't play as your favorite class, right? Like, you'll find that the way you function, the way your brain works, it'll be like, you know what, rogue is just how I naturally perform at my best. So I'm going to go into this competition or whatever, this challenge with the rogue, but I hate rogues. I want to be a warrior, right? I hate sneaking around and waiting for the opportunity to stab somebody. I want to rush in there, right?
Yeah.
And do my whirlwinds, right? Like, that's me. And so you make a choice. You know, there's a good chance that the class that you're best at is not the class you're playing, right? The class that you're playing is the one you like the most, right? And feel connected to. And you've made that choice as part of your identity and personality. And it's not easy to change, and you refuse to change, right? Because it's just part of you, you know, like, and so covenants I see as a potential extension of that, right? When it comes to like being on that scale of changeability and identity and things like that. So I would love to see people like just pick the thing that they identify with, that they're most excited about. They like the cosmetics, they like the way the mechanics play, etc. And then just obviously try to make the most of, you know, their power levels within that metric.
Where you went in that thought experiment, I think is something that you'll hear a lot of people talk about quite a bit. It's the idea of, you are going to be the best at something if you enjoy it enough to play it more, right? You're going to get your 10,000 hours if you actually enjoy playing this. And it's that kind of grinder mentality that some people have. And it's like, yes, this might not be ideal, but you will become ideal at it because you enjoy it.
Because you love it.
Yeah, but don't you think that they've done a lot of stuff to mitigate that portion of people's brains? Guys, stop with the gotcha bases over the grinder thing, because it's actually important. I feel like they did a lot of things to actually mitigate that. When you look at something like Demon Hunter being thrown into the game, where it's like, hey, look, 4 buttons, go off, son. And now they're like, is that way to perform? And I don't think that people fall into that place where they can really identify with something and find something that they like, because instead you throw the throwaway experience at somebody. You say, hey, look, this is easy to play. You can jump in right now. And,
for sure.
and they can kind of experience a bunch of those different things. They don't have to put the time in, and the connections are never made.
Yeah, for sure. All those things I think are true. That's why Covenant is such a shock to our system, right? Like if this Covenant system had come out in vanilla WoW, I just don't think that people would be reacting to it the way they are, because the homogenization of classes and, you know, sort of pushing everything to the middle, you know, that's been the slow, steady decline of identity in general, right? People making choices based on that sense of role playing and that feeling of, oh, I want to be like this, I want to feel like this, I want to look like this. And so now we're at this point where all of that stuff is sort of gone, or has been shelved and replaced by just, let's just make pure power choices so we can get through the content. This is a raid game. This is a competitive esports raid game. And so Covenants are coming along, and it's like, oh, they're trying to, you know, put some of the abilities back after they've pruned them, right? So they're taking strides towards reinvesting in identity, and everyone is reacting with like this, you can't do that, my power.
Well, I think one of the things that you very eloquently said multiple times is the idea of that identity. Where does it exist on the character sheet right now? Because identity with factions has changed over time. You have meaningless gear that's just...
Transmog hurts the identity for sure.
Yeah. Well, you look at it across the board, right? Like you get the hit there, where pieces don't have the iconic names anymore. Transmog's going to make it so visually you don't have that representation. You're able to change between specs much easier now. You're able to boost classes and instantly gear them as well. So all of that identity gets completely diminished. Do you think that the BOOB slider could be a way to bring that back? Do you think that the BOOB slider could actually, could that bring back identity in the game?
I would say 100%, except my people say butt slider in response. Like, I can't leave out the butt slider.
Why not both?
Yeah.
There it is.
But here's the thing, you have to pick meaningful choices, boob or butt when you go in.
Okay, this is worse than Covenants.
What's it gonna be?
Such a hard decision.
Oh no.
Is this what Allcraft is reduced to? I thought we were having meaningful
this is
discussion.
probably
instead of Horde or Alliance, you have to shoot ass.
yeah. It works, man. It works.
It works.
But for the boobs.
Programmable, chat. You guys are programmable.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Rich, you want to do questions?
Yeah, dude, I think we just saved World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Let's get some claps for Kevin, dude. We saved the game. All right.
This was for you.
Yeah, exactly. I can't believe they did that, man.
Dude, I didn't see it yet, so I actually have no idea what you guys are talking about. I'll watch it a little bit later on. But let's look at some of these questions right now. See what people are asking, because I already see a lot of questions about borrow powered, which I do think we can lean into a little bit here. It says, what possible alternatives for borrowed powered system like Covenant's Azerite could you imagine be placed in the game to progress your character?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So borrow power is the concept where you get it for this expansion, they take it away the next at the end and give you something new.
That's the idea.
It is the most overused term by the community right now.
Right.
And it actually doesn't mean what it used to nearly as much. I don't think people understand what the idea of borrowed power really was anymore.
So does it work as a concept, I guess, is the question. Should it be used? Is that a fair assessment of that
Pretty
question?
much, yeah.
Yeah. How do you actually feel about the idea of having borrowed power in the game?
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. I understand how they've gotten to the point where they think it's good, because they've had to expand the game, 8 times. And it's hard to just keep giving more and more power because you have power creep, and that's a real issue. You want to feel like your character's progressing in a meaningful way every expansion. but that leads to big problems. So yeah, like I get asked this a lot on my channel as well, is do we have to add 10 levels every time we expand? And the answer, I think, is no. I think it's an easy place to go to, especially when you're trying to get people hyped about, the new expansion. We're going to give you 10 more levels. We're going to give you all this extra power. Everyone's going to be twice the god they were in the last expansion, But in terms of like making people happy with an expansion, I think content is a big part of it. And you have to have people progress a little bit, but not nearly as much as I feel like traditional expansions do. So I think it comes at too high a cost, basically.
And I actually kind of want to, because kind of how I alluded to, the idea of borrowed power gets thrown around a lot. And, if you actually get down to what some people are saying, they literally get to the place where it's like, yeah, I don't keep my gear forever. It's borrowed power, right? Which obviously isn't what the term does mean.
Yeah.
So when you look at a system, where do you kind of draw the line? Like, what is that aspect? Like when you look at legendaries, for example, that was one of the real things that started to bring up that discussion in Legion of borrowed power. So what systems, like what is the property of a system that you would define it being this borrowed power idea?
Anything that's temporary, anything that's going to become a part of you that you're going to have to like get rid of in the future. So like you could even consider some of the things they've pruned in terms of class abilities as borrowed power on a longer scale. You got to be real careful with that stuff because again, it's they don't have to be because they don't care about identity. But back in the day, we cared about this being a part of you. Remember when I could do this, like this made me feel good. This is the thing I loved. Like people come into my channel all the time and they're like, you know what I love? The chain lightning sound effect.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, it's just this weird thing that really connected with somebody. And it's like, if we were to just take chain lightning away one day, guys lost like a big part of what he loved about the game. So it's really you have to be really careful with stuff like that when you take stuff away. And people get attached to things very quickly, very easily, and very powerfully. And so you have to control how fast stuff comes in, and you have to be really careful about taking it away. It shouldn't be these planned decisions, right? Like, I'm going to give you something you really want, and the intention is it's going to go away next patch. Like, when I hear that in a design meeting, I'm like, whoa, that sounds the exact opposite of the kind of thing we should be doing to players.
That's what happened a lot in BFA, is like we've gotten tons of really cool things that we all know are going to go away. I'm kind of sad about some of them, but happy about others. But it is like really kind of weird where like it's so much of your gameplay is just fleeting. Whereas like in Burning Crusade and Wrath, whenever you would get your new spells, you knew that you'd take those into the next expansion too. I preferred that.
Right. Yeah. And I don't want to segue into a whole discussion on Torghast, but that's Torghast in a nutshell right there.
Yeah.
Very quick. I mean, it's the accelerated borrowed power mechanism.
We're going to have to have another episode on Torghast. I actually think we could have a full episode with you on Torghast. It would be really interesting.
My prediction, my TLDR is just it's going to be a gigantic mistake. It's going to cause so much damage. Yep.
Why do you think
it's going to be just super fun for a very short time, and then it's going to cause unbelievable damage to the game.
I hope not.
Do you play many roguelikes currently?
I love roguelikes.
Yeah, so do I. And one of the things that's so surprising with me with Torghast is all of the things that make the fundamental design of those games work don't really exist in Torghast. It's so absurd to me.
Right.
Like
really funny.
Like none of it is there. None of those systems are there, and it actually blows my mind. The whole idea. I think one of the reasons that those games continue to win is just that idea of you go in with a plan, and you get surprised. You finish playing, and you go, "Well, dude, I got to do it with this now because I wanted to do it the first time." And you play to actually almost like make that Rube Goldberg machine go. And with Torghast, it's just flat passive increases to damage. It's like flat stat increases.
10% versatility.
There's no nuance. Yeah.
Yeah,
boy.
it's definitely a weird thing. I do want to ask with the borrow power thing, because I'm very interested with a lot of your opinions on this. I feel like now in particular you start to have some of these systems like the Legion legendaries, like the artifact weapons, where like Asmon just mentioned, you're getting abilities tied to these. Do you think that there ever is an appropriate place to dramatically modify a player's ability, whether it's like corruption, slowing a target like Sacrolash did, or do you think that there's a place for that on gear, or do you think that that shouldn't be found in gear?
Pet battles, maybe.
Ooh.
Put it all in pet battles.
That's right. Yeah, it's really tough. It's really tough to do those things. Like, we had this like controlled, steady plan. Like back in the day when we were making vanilla, we had spreadsheets that went out to level 100, and we tried to plan for the very careful, methodical increases in power. Obviously, those plans got thrown out.
Yeah.
For TBC development, but I think, I still think that was a mistake. But yeah, like it should be very careful. It should be very controlled. And I think people at the end of the day, they appreciate things when they're a little more grounded. Like, I think a lot of people make fun of like BFA right now, because it's like every time I auto attack, I hit for 5 million, or some huge number, right? Just feels wrong, just feels weird. And then also like the amount people will go through to get +1 to an attribute, has been proven since the days of EverQuest. Like, people would do insane things and put in countless amount of time for +1 in one attribute, right? So I don't think we respect those two things enough, both sides of that equation, and realize the value of controlling things and being more methodical. I think designers can fall into the trap of that instant massive gratification of, all of a sudden I kill the first boar in Hellfire and I'm a god because I just replaced all of my gear with this loot pinata, right?
I didn't like that, man. Like, I didn't like how, like, whenever BC came out, it just made all the vanilla raids irrelevant.
Right.
I don't know. Like, and now
that was the specific designer. Like this, I had arguments with the item designers, and I got overruled because I wasn't an item designer, but that essential thing is like they had this perception that players need to feel the difference in every swing with every piece of new gear they get. And I was just like, they really don't. It can be a more slow, gradual process. They need to know that they're progressing, but they don't need, planet destroying improvements, with every new piece of gear.
Well, it's like now it's in BFA, like every patch you see like massive power growth. Like you see more power growth in one patch in a current expansion than you did all throughout Burning Crusade.
Yeah, and it's very unsustainable, right? Like that's why they have number crutches and level squishes and all that nonsense.
Yeah, and it takes form in many different ways, right? So I mean, obviously you don't have that Jigsaw progression, you don't have that milestone progression that you used to feel in a lot of ways, but I feel like there's so many different ways that we could actually talk about some of this stuff. But there was this one moment when Ian was talking about a lot of things that happened with the pruning, and I think this is one of the other things that felt relatively unsustainable. And he started to talk about the way that the talent trees if you would call them talent trees, the way that your talent selections actually became every single person on this row had a movement ability, and it felt very homogenized, right? Everybody had a movement ability. It didn't matter if you were rogue, it didn't matter if you were warlock. This was the movement talent. And there was kind of this idea where Ian goes, we needed to prune to get to a place where we weren't like this anymore and it wasn't homogenized. Do you think that is a valid line? And I don't want to misquote Ian with what he actually said. This is my interpretation of it. I'm not quoting Ian verbatim because I know he's a lawyer and I don't want to get arrested. But, but in all seriousness,
that said at some point, so just throw that in there.
It's I have a lot of respect for Ian, but do you think that pruning is something that can get classes? Like, do you think that was something that needed to happen with the current state of the game?
He's certainly right. Like if you clear the table, if you just like, flip the table, then you're going to have a lot of space to do new things, right? But the question is that what you can do? It's should you do it, and what's the damage that you're causing, right? Because you gotta pick up the pieces at some point after flipping the table, and it's kind of a consequence of the previous thinking. Like if it had been controlled all along as we originally planned, and a little bit more methodical and a little slower, then the pruning wouldn't have to have been as dramatic. It may not have had to have come as quickly as it did. But so it's sort of like, he's reaping the rewards that he sowed, right? Yeah. And in some cases we sowed. Like some of this damage was done before he even got there. So I don't want to say that he's responsible for all that, but yeah, pruning it, you just have to be really careful with it. And yeah, it'll make space for new things, but then is that really the process? Like, because again, extend that idea out, and that's where you end up with borrowed power, right? Oh, we'll just keep doing this. We'll just prune and then give you something else amazing, and then we'll prune that and we'll give you something else amazing. And
well, WoW's a lot like life, right? Everything starts out and you're doughy-eyed, and then all of a sudden you spend 10 years doing nothing but making mistakes. And
what's the life thing? I don't know what you're talking about.
I spent a lot of time making mistakes. I think Asmon would say the same exact thing.
Oh.
Then at a certain point, you're able to take those mistakes and you're able to reflect on them, and you're able to do some good shit with them, right? You learn. Do you think that WoW is in a position right now where it can learn from those mistakes?
Absolutely. You learn way more from mistakes, right, than you do from successes. They test you in totally different ways. That was the basis for my channel name before I changed it, Failure and Analysis. But it absolutely can. The question is, does the retail audience that's left want it to? Do they want it to change? Is it more valuable to Blizzard to keep catering to what's left of their audience, or do they want to try to bring back some of the audience they've lost? Because, like when people say covenants in all of retail, let's say everybody's in agreement, says this is terrible, right? But there's 9 million people or 11.5 million people that used to play the game that says this sounds awesome, right? Is there value in that? Or are those people just gone and we don't care about them and never want them to come back?
I mean, I think that's one of the best things about Classic WoW is it brought back a lot of those old subs and people that had quit for like 10 years. And now that Classic's back, they're playing that instead.
And some of those people are going to play Shadowlands, right? And hopefully start influencing Shadowlands, right?
Yeah.
In a way that I can agree with, right? And can get excited about. So
yeah, it's funny. I do feel like, though, one of the things that the developers and other people who are going to be looking at the statistics will always be up against is some of the fallacies that are inherently going to happen anytime that you try to observe something, right? I think a lot of people right now, and this is an opinion, and I'm sure a lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people right now will do things like watch Asmon stream and say like Asmon is one of the most popular streamers, and he has a huge community and engages with the content because it's focused around collectible items inside of the game, and because of that, most of the community is somebody like our mount collectors. They want to be collecting different things with transmog, and I think that that's a reasonable assumption to make when you look at something on a visceral level. But when I look at Asmon's stream, everything that I think is not that. I go, the reason that it has nothing to do with the actual game that's playing is because people are the most interesting thing in the ecosystem of World of Warcraft. Asmon, yes, it's around these things that are collection based, but the God's honest truth is he's like the only person making events that the game doesn't make anymore. He's making places for players to play with other players, show off different things that they've achieved in the game. And to me, it says that all the things that were great about Classic WoW, great about BC, like those are the things that people want. It doesn't and how often do you think that misread of data actually does happen in game design?
Yeah, and it's surprising to me too, because when we first talked about WoW's like long-term survival or any MMO's long-term survival, it was always about the social elements, right? Long after the game has been crushed, people still log in to hang out with each other because these are the friendships, relationships we've made. any new content that gets thrown in is just an excuse, right? It's and when we don't have new content, we make up new content. If you look at, like, shout out to the guys in the hardcore community, right?
Yeah.
That are making, hardcore classic runs. That's just new content. It's a new way to play a game that's 15 years old. That's super fun. So that's the kind of things that happen, right, in an MMO, and keep it breathing. And yet there's nobody that's been working on social systems in the game that I can think about. Like, I don't want to put you out of a job, Asmongold, but how hard would it be for them to implement a mount-off competition in their game? Right?
They tried doing a transmog comp
thing. Yeah, they
tried. It would be
Yeah.
so easy, but they don't have a designer that even thinks about those things or works on those things. So, it's like, it baffles me.
Did you see Trial of Style?
No.
So they did try to implement basically, and this was when Asmon was like, you can, like, I don't think anybody can disagree that Asmon was a big reason that this was added in. Right. And I respect that a whole bunch. Mm-hmm. When you actually do look at Trial of Style, I do think it missed the mark in a lot of ways, but the idea was very much in the right place. Mm-hmm. They basically added, and Asmon can speak to this a little bit better. It was like, I think it still exists, right, as a calendar event?
Sure does. Spent like 3 hours last week trying to win it.
Oh, so you can only win your own transmog competitions?
I'm the judge. I don't even win those. Like,
yeah, whoever wears purple wins. We've all seen.
Okay, dude. Yeah, you're playing into those memes. And people think that's real, dude. But yeah. I mean, they added a transmog competition into the game, and it was pretty interesting the way they did it.
That's good.
Yeah, I was glad about that, 100%.
Yeah, they need to do more of that kind of stuff. Like, that's... Yeah. But again, like, the retail... I guess a lot of retail players might say, why the hell are you working on this when the raids are so bad, or Azerite is so bad, or
Azerite, or dungeon, something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So back in the day, I think one of the things that naturally happened when, for some players, was there was a break. Right, you beat the content, and then you said, "Yo, I'm gonna chill in this mailbox with my dick hanging out. Look at it,
right.
It touches the mail, dude. I got it. Yeah, right." It was like just like this whole moment where you actually relaxed, and there weren't reasons to actually like log on and stay on the treadmill and get Titanforging.
Right.
Do you think that that's healthier for the game to have those natural breaks?
Absolutely. Again, we talk about this a ton on my channel. I think it's very good that there's an endpoint. You can beat the game in some respect. That's when you get creative. That's when you express yourself. We talked about this a while back. That's why Asmongold started making content.
I just show them how it's done.
Yeah, you have to feel like I don't have to be on the treadmill anymore. Those moments of pause are actually... this is one of the big mistakes that I made in TBC, actually, when people talk about things I wish I could pull back out, and it was just from a moment-to-moment play experience, most of the classes and specs in TBC, when you were soloing, didn't have to stop and drink anymore. They were self-sustaining, right?
Yes.
In vanilla, you have to stop and drink, sit and drink, eat and drink every 2 to 4 fights, depending on how good you are or whatever. But that was a moment where you could throw a Chuck Norris joke into Baron's chat, or catch up on messages in your guild, or you could be social. You could plan what you were going to do next. You could look at the terrain and you could see a guy fighting and maybe interact with him. Like those were intentionally designed moments where you could not be go all the time, right? And now, ever since TBC, you could just always be go, and so you should be go all the time. So that's sort of the start of that mentality of I don't have time for anything but go, chasing that item score, Raider IO, whatever it is, at all times. Always be progressing, right? And yeah, like it's a sad thing because a lot of that other stuff has gotten, left to the wayside in light of that ability just to go, so having an endpoint where you feel you can relax. It should happen not only at the end of a content experience, but also periodically throughout the experience. I think those are good. Those moments to pause are really good.
It's good. It's a really interesting way to look at it. I've always kind of felt the same way in terms of like gear. I feel like it's much better to stop raiding or stop playing out of just like completing the game rather than just giving up because you know you're never going to be done. It's like quitting out of completion versus quitting out of apathy.
Yes.
So this is kind of this is like a directly coming from New World right now. It says, how would you feel about proximity chat in World of Warcraft? Found in New World.
Yeah, I wonder if that can be done.
That'd be awesome.
Ultima Online, that's all we had was proximity chat. And it was amazing in certain respects. It was absolutely amazing. It allowed for experiences that just can't be replicated anymore. So I'm not sure if it'll work because of the prevalence of Discord and everything else. But yeah, it's also one of those like customer service related questions. Do they want to police it? Right? Is the most important business question, right? Because I do think it can add a fair bit to the game, but it can very easily go south. And then what? You know, like is the game under policed and everyone's running around being, you know, racist and homophobic and absolutely crazy, or is it policed enough where it adds to the game and that kind of stuff stays out of it, right? So
this is a really big question. I gotta get up for 1 second too to open my door. How do you feel about PvP scaling?
Oh God, do you even know about that, Kevin?
I've heard some things like, sockets are bad, basically.
So upgrading your gear makes you do less damage. It's,
right.
It's just how it works.
Yeah, pretty awful. And I haven't researched it enough to know or to try to guess at what the intent of the designer was, right, in that case. So I'm not sure if they're like, yep, it had to be like that. It's a consequence of whatever, but or if it's just like, oh, wow, we screwed up, like that was an oversight we didn't consider. So
probably,
but I think scaling in any of these games it feels really terrible. Like I'm always preaching how things in games like an MMO that are supposed to be world driven are supposed to be real, like, and I use that word knowing it's kind of meme worthy, but it's supposed to feel like this is the world, this is who I am, these are my things. The relationship between other people is something you can work out. Like it's just not, it's not shifting constantly to serve some gamified purpose, right? Once you start scaling things, like it no longer feels like a world that you exist in and is like real in a fantasy virtual setting. It starts to just feel like this big game. And the more it feels like a big game, the less it feels like a world. So, and that's consistent with a lot of decisions over the years with WoW, is like, let's make this a better game, but it's come at the cost of it feeling like a real place, right?
Oh, I hated scaling whenever they added it in Legion. I've always looked at it the same way you do, is that I felt that like old WoW was like less of a game and more of a fantasy world simulator. And they did this in Legion, and like basically one of the cool things in like vanilla, for example, is going back and like getting to the break point where you can solo a certain boss, or you can solo a certain dungeon or something like that, or do a big enough pull and do this much damage. And like with scaling, like it kind of cuts that in half, because you feel like you're working towards, I used to be able to kill this boss in like fucking 5 seconds or 10 seconds, and now it takes twice as long for no real reason.
Right.
It's just, it feels like you're not really, it feels like you're being throttled, I guess. I don't like that at all.
Yeah, and also it's a good way of gauging your progression in the sense of your place in it, right? Like not only do you go back to Elwyn and one-shot the boars, but you remember the Murloc camps, being a giant pain in the ass, right?
Yeah, like, and now you go back in there, you kill them all.
you can exact your vengeance, right?
Exactly.
Like, you've come so far, kid, right? Like,
Exactly.
It's just amazing. So
Yeah, you don't feel like an actual progression or a dominance over the world in the way that you used to. Every single experience is just kind of flattened. I do want to follow up, though, on that question, because I feel like this is something that's been talked about in the community a lot recently, and this is probably going to be one of the last questions. But when you do actually look at PvP gear and rewards for PvE, and also design choices with different abilities, like there has always been a weird dissonance in the game between PvP and PvE. How do you actually feel about some of the different approaches that have been taken over the years between PvP and PvE balance?
yeah, yeah. So has it? I want to defend my design to some extent and say that it hasn't always been dissonant, right? Because that was one of the goals. You can certainly say by Nax it was massively dissonant. So even before vanilla was over, damage was being done. But I strive to make the experience of fighting a mob from a mathematical standpoint the same as fighting another player. And that's true to a point, like especially in the low levels, it can be pretty fun and pretty consistent. But I think a lot of the approaches have been, many of them have been not good. Because at the end of the day, you want those experiences to match up. You want the experience of fighting a player and fighting a creature to feel like they're in the same ballpark. In terms of just like math, like imagine you're just standing there thumping where you're just trading blows. You want that experience to be somewhat close to each other. It gets pretty quickly out of whack when you start specializing, right? Specializing your DPS, specializing your tank, specializing your healer. That's when things start to get a little crazy. And some of the approaches, like adding stamina to everything, to make sure everyone's health pools go up as fast as their damage is. Things like resilience, right, to compensate for the crazy amount of mitigation that was being thrown up in for raid tanking and things like that.
Yeah.
It's just a tough place to go down, and they're short-term solutions, but you want the at the end of the day, you want the experiences to be similar so that people can go from one to the other more seamlessly. So they're not like the more they got divergent, the two experiences, the more players wanted to just do the one thing, right? Which is really bad for the game at the end of the day. Because then it's like you have different communities asking the developers to design two different games. Yeah. Can't we just make this an arena game from now on? Can't we just make this a raid game from now on? Like, screw those other guys, like I don't want to do that. So you want them to stay together so that people can mix and match. It gives people an opportunity to blow off steam between raids, to go do some arenas and have some fun potentially, or vice versa, and not have to like be in the ground, like, oh, I got to get a bunch of gear before I can even step into the arena. And none of this gear I've acquired by killing dragons is good,
For now, it's the opposite.
Yeah. So you want those things to be close together as much as possible. And a lot of those things continue to separate the experiences. So that's what you have to be watchful for when you design a new system that's trying to take care of their individual groups, but is actually pushing them really far away from each other.
I think that's what's happened is like players have self-segregated and they've just wanted the game to just be kind of like their own insular experience. I've talked about this a lot. I disagree with that as well.
Right. And World of Warcraft is at its best when it's serving a lot of different player types, right? Because again, it's the social experiences, it's the interactions between a wide variety of people that make for the really crazy memorable stuff. And so if you make the game only for one group, then that group gets really uncreative when it comes to bouncing off each other because they're all the same person, right? And it's so much better when RPers run into hardcore PvPers, and raiders run into explorers, or whatever. Like that's where the magic happens. It's like different ideas, and that's when people can laugh about all the different types of things going on, and it's when it's at its healthiest.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
I mean, also, I think Asmon and I tell all these stories all the time back when we were players, and you would stumble upon different people who were playing the game in a way that was different than you, and it inspired you to try different things in the game. Now, I obviously have made pretty much my entire career and my entire life off of hosting and commentating esports, but I do feel like for a lot of games, and I'm curious how you feel about it, I feel like you have a lot of industry people and a lot of people who want to make money off of games and content on games, seeing esports be successful in certain places, and they try to jam it now into pretty much every game. And I personally feel like esports has destroyed quite a few games, trying to make everything an esport. Do you think that esports is somewhat of a plague to the modern game designer?
Yeah, it can be. Anytime someone who's doesn't care about the integrity of the thing, the art, the craft, comes in and wants to monetize it or use it for some other purpose than just being an awesome, work of art, right, is going to cause damage to the game or whatever it is. So, and that's so traditional, right? Like as soon as something starts to make money, then money people start showing up, and it's like, ooh, how can I get in on this, right?
Yeah, that's about right.
And the things change, right? The fundamentals of it change. They try to figure out what the formula is. They try to replicate it. They try to mass produce it.
Happens with Twitch.
And all of that stuff, takes away from the uniqueness and amazingness of the thing that it started as. So,
yeah, I have one last question here. Just, do you think players nowadays could kill pre-nerf Cthulhu?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Like the idea that Ian mathematically proved it couldn't be killable, or is so ridiculous, because you have to start things like that from some mathematical assumption about DPS or mitigation or whatever it is, and all of those assumptions he used back in the day were probably no longer real in today's setting.
No.
So
okay.
He was working off bad information, basically, to prove that point. And it's another shout out to all you meta slaves out there. Like, don't believe the hype, right? Like, if you guys were convinced that he was speaking truth, right, because he had solved the meta, right? But obviously, we've come a long way. So.
I think it goes to show, you see people do 5 Priest to Car in like BWL and MC gear, that, and like ranking gear, just blowing it the fuck out in like 2 minutes versus, elitist jerks not being able to do it in full tier 3. So it's crazy to see how much better people are.
Onyxia, right, happened. And
oh jeez, yeah.
I think back in vanilla we were down to a 6-man did Onyxia, but now it's down to 3. A 3-man.
I think it was 3 in vanilla too. I remember very clearly watching the video. It was a night elf warrior with the Thunder Fury and the ZG shield, or not ZG, AQ shield.
So even back in the day we did 3-man. Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, I do have one more. I apologize. I have to ask this. What about Ashes of Creation? What do you think?
What do I think? I think it's already done tremendous work at pushing the envelope. Like, it should open our eyes.
Okay.
To what can be, what we should be striving for, what we should be demanding as a market, which is some people to pull their heads out of their ass and start creating some new things, to be ambitious, to go for it, right? Shoot for the skies. Even if I worry that they're going to be able to pull off everything that they want to.
Yeah.
Because I definitely don't think that everything they think is going to work out is actually going to work out. But, and that'll be the true test, is figuring out how they respond to things not going the way they hoped, right? How they adjust, how they iterate.
That's really good.
Because iteration is a huge thing, right? But I'm super excited. I want it to succeed. I want it to, continue pushing the elements, pushing the envelope. So Yeah, I'm excited. It'll be fun to follow.
Whew. That was a good fucking episode, man. Thank you so much, Kevin. I definitely think that sometime soon, maybe after we actually get to see some of the things with Shadowlands, maybe Torghast in particular, I definitely think it would be awesome to have you back on and deep dive some of that.
Yeah, sounds great. Anytime. Yeah, I could go on and on about Torghast too, for sure. Or as I like to call it, Torgasm.
All right. Well, hopefully it's going to be Torgasm and not Chorgast. So I guess we'll have to find out. Yeah, thank you again so much. It's a great honor as somebody who's played WoW for 15 years. It's a great honor to talk to one of the architects of it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yeah.
I had a great time. Yeah, anytime, guys.
Thank you very much. Anyway, guys, please go ahead and link Kevin Jordan's socials in the chat. Give him a follow. One of the original World of Warcraft devs. Talks about game design all the time. And you're playing Final Fantasy 14 now, right?
I am, yeah. And Escape from Tarkov every day.
All right.
Amazing
Okay.
game.
Well, then there we go. Hopefully the people that keep hounding me to play it every day can just watch you. There you go,
That's right.
man.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And if you guys want to stick around, Rich and I are going to be on the after show. We're going to go ahead and answer some of your questions and your feedback and everything like that. So if you want to stick around, I'll go ahead and host on over to that. But anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and step off and finish up the stream. But thank you again very much. Thank you.
See ya.
All right.
Peace.
See you later.